Philadelphia has always carried a different kind of silence after midnight. Not the peaceful kind, but a heavy, watchful stillness that feels like the city itself is listening. In the 1970 seconds and early 1980 seconds, that silence was shaped by whispered names, coded phone calls, and men who understood that power didn't need to announce itself. It simply existed. Into this world was born Joey Merlino, a name that would one day echo through courtrooms, headlines, and late-night conversations, but first belonged to a quiet boy growing up in South Philadelphia, surrounded by legacy rather than luxury. Joey grew up in a neighborhood where loyalty mattered more than money, and reputation was worth more than any paycheck. Brick row houses stood shoulder to shoulder, and families knew each other not just by name, but by history. In these streets, everyone understood who held influence and who merely survived beside it. Joey's father, Chuck Merlino, was already a known figure in organized crime circles, respected for his discipline and connections. The Merlino name carried weight, even if it wasn't spoken loudly. For Joey, this wasn't mythology or legend, it was simply life. As a child, Joey watched men come and go from his father's circle. They spoke carefully, never directly, always with meaning hidden beneath their words. Conversations stopped when children entered the room. Doors closed softly. Joey learned early that silence was a form of protection. He also learned that respect wasn't demanded, it was earned, often through restraint rather than aggression. These lessons sank in long before he understood their importance. Unlike the flashy criminals portrayed in movies, the men Joey observed lived modestly. They dressed clean but not extravagant, drove reliable cars rather than exotic ones, and avoided attention whenever possible. This wasn't because they lacked ambition, but because attention attracted consequences. Joey absorbed this mindset naturally. He wasn't a reckless child, nor was he particularly loud. Teachers described him as observant, someone who watched more than he spoke. Friends noticed he had a calm confidence, even at a young age. By his teenage years, Joey was already familiar with the invisible rules of the street. He understood which corners belonged to whom, which disputes were settled quietly, and which were never discussed at all. While other teenagers chased short-term thrills, Joey showed patience. He stayed close to family, listened carefully, and avoided unnecessary trouble. That restraint would later become one of his defining traits. The Philadelphia Mafia at the time was in a fragile state. Years of internal conflict and federal pressure had weakened leadership. Power structures shifted constantly. Alliances formed and dissolved, and trust was a rare commodity. Joey's upbringing placed him near these fault lines. He didn't step into this world suddenly. He drifted into it gradually, almost inevitably, guided by blood ties and expectation rather than choice. When Joey began associating more closely with his father's circle, it wasn't announced or celebrated. There was no ceremony, no declaration. Instead, responsibilities appeared quietly. A message to deliver, a meeting to observe, a favor to coordinate. Each task was small, but each carried meaning. Joey approached them seriously, understanding that mistakes were remembered longer than successes. What separated Joey from many young men entering organized crime was his ability to balance confidence with humility. He didn't act entitled because of his family name. In fact, he often worked harder to prove he deserved respect on his own terms. Older members noticed this. They watched how he handled pressure, how he listened without interrupting, and how he avoided drawing attention to himself. In a world where ego often led to downfall, Joey's calm demeanor stood out. As the 1980 seconds progressed, law enforcement tightened its grip on organized crime nationwide. Wiretaps, informants, and federal indictments became common tools. Many crime families struggled to adapt, but those who survived understood the need for discipline and discretion. Joey watched seasoned figures fall, not because they lacked power, but because they underestimated the changing environment. These lessons shaped his approach long before he ever held real authority. Joey's reputation grew quietly. He wasn't known for violence or intimidation, but for reliability. If Joey said something would be handled, it was. If he gave his word, it meant something. That reliability became his currency. In an organization built on fragile trust, being dependable was a form of strength. By the late 1980 seconds, Joey was no longer just observing. He was participating, making decisions, and earning influence. Yet even then, he avoided excess. No loud celebrations, no unnecessary risks. He understood that survival in this world depended on patience and timing. Power, he believed, came not from force alone, but from knowing when to act and when to wait. Philadelphia itself mirrored Joey's rise. The city was changing, caught between its gritty past and an uncertain future. Old neighborhoods struggled, new opportunities emerged, and the underworld adapted alongside legitimate businesses. Joey moved through this shifting landscape with calculated ease, aware that every move left a trace. As whispers about leadership struggles within the Philadelphia Mafia grew louder, Joey remained in the background. He didn't push for control. He didn't challenge authority openly. Instead, he positioned himself as someone others could rely on when chaos emerged. This strategic patience would later define his ascent. By the time the 1,990 seconds approached, Joey Merlino was no longer just a name inherited from his father. He was becoming a figure in his own right, one shaped by silence, observation, and a deep understanding of how power truly worked in Philadelphia's criminal underworld. The city was preparing for a new era, even if it didn't yet realize it, and Joey stood quietly at the edge of that transformation. The stage was set. Alliances were fragile. Leadership was uncertain. And in the shadows of South Philadelphia, a calm, watchful figure waited not for permission, but for the right moment. By the time the early 1,990 seconds arrived, Philadelphia's criminal underworld was no longer ruled by certainty. It was governed by pressure. Federal investigations loomed constantly. Long prison sentences waited behind every mistake, and the old structure that once kept order had begun to crack. In this environment, survival depended less on raw power and more on adaptability. It was during this tense period that Joey Merlino began moving from the margins of influence toward its center, not through dramatic gestures, but through steady control. Joey understood something that many older figures struggled to accept. The world had changed. The era of loud authority and unquestioned dominance was fading. Informants were everywhere, and technology had become an unseen enemy. Conversations could no longer be careless, meetings could no longer be crowded, and loyalty could no longer be assumed. Joey adjusted instinctively. He limited exposure, compartmentalized information, and trusted only those who had proven themselves over time. His daily routine reflected discipline. Joey avoided patterns that could be tracked. He kept meetings brief and purposeful. When decisions needed to be made, he listened more than he spoke, absorbing every detail before acting. This wasn't hesitation, it was calculation. In a city where impulsive decisions often led to indictments, Joey's measured approach felt almost revolutionary. As internal tensions grew within the Philadelphia Mafia, factions quietly formed. Some members favored aggressive expansion, while others pushed for caution. Joey didn't openly align himself with either side. Instead, he positioned himself as a stabilizing force, someone who could communicate across divides without appearing threatening. This made him invaluable. When disputes arose, Joey was often the one trusted to relay messages or propose compromises. Loyalty became the defining theme of this period. Not loyalty demanded through fear, but loyalty earned through consistency. Joey showed that he protected those who stood by him. If someone followed his direction and faced consequences, Joey ensured they weren't forgotten. Legal support, financial assistance for families, and quiet reassurance became tools he used to strengthen bonds. In a world where abandonment was common, this kind of support carried immense weight. At the same time, Joey was careful not to overextend himself. He understood that visibility attracted scrutiny. Rather than expanding operations recklessly, he focused on tightening control over existing networks. Efficiency replaced excess. Waste was eliminated. Risks were calculated. This made his circle smaller but stronger. Law enforcement pressure intensified. Surveillance increased. Arrests sent shockwaves through the organization. Each indictment created a vacuum, and vacuums demanded leadership. Joey never rushed to fill them. Instead, he allowed others to reveal their weaknesses. Those who sought attention often became targets. Those who acted quietly endured. Joey's ability to read people sharpened during this time. He could sense when someone was nervous, when loyalty wavered, or when ambition outweighed judgment. Rather than confronting these issues directly, he adjusted roles subtly. A person showing instability might be moved away from sensitive matters. Someone proving reliability would be given slightly more responsibility. This slow reshaping of the organization happened almost invisibly. Philadelphia's streets mirrored the tension inside the underworld. Economic shifts left neighborhoods struggling, and desperation fed crime. Joey recognized that chaos outside could easily spill inside. He encouraged order, not through brutality, but through structure. Rules were reinforced quietly. Expectations were clear. Consequences existed, but they didn't need to be advertised. One of Joey's greatest strengths was his understanding of image. He knew how he was perceived mattered. He avoided unnecessary luxury, dressed modestly, and blended into everyday surroundings. This wasn't humility, it was strategy. The less remarkable he appeared, the less attention he attracted. Meanwhile, his influence grew beneath the surface. As older leaders became increasingly entangled in legal battles, their ability to guide the organization weakened. Joey stepped in where needed, not as a replacement, but as a problem solver. He ensured operations continued smoothly, despite disruptions. This reliability didn't go unnoticed. Gradually, people began deferring to him, not because he demanded it, but because it made sense. Trust, once fractured, began to consolidate around Joey. He didn't promise safety no one could, but he promised rational decisions. In an environment defined by uncertainty, that promise held power. His calm demeanor during crises reassured those around him. When arrests happened, he didn't panic. When rumors spread, he didn't react impulsively. This emotional control became his signature. The pressure of potential indictment hovered constantly. Joey knew every meeting, every call, every interaction carried risk. He adapted by limiting exposure and delegating carefully. He understood that survival required thinking several steps ahead, anticipating not just threats, but reactions to threats. By the mid-1990s, it became clear that the Philadelphia Mafia was drifting toward a new configuration. Authority was no longer centralized in name alone, it was shifting toward whoever could maintain stability. Joey didn't announce himself as a leader, he simply acted like one. Decisions flowed through him. Conflicts ended with his input. Operations aligned with his direction. What made Joey's rise unusual was the absence of spectacle. There were no dramatic power grabs, no public displays of dominance. His ascent was quiet, almost organic. Those inside the organization barely noticed the transition until it was already complete. Those outside struggled to understand how someone so low profile could wield so much influence. As the decade progressed, Joey stood at the intersection of loyalty and pressure. He had proven he could withstand scrutiny, manage conflict, and adapt to a changing world. The foundations of authority had been laid carefully, brick by brick, without noise or celebration. Philadelphia's underworld was entering a new era, one defined not by fear alone, but by calculated restraint. And Joey Merlino, shaped by patience and sharpened by pressure, was ready for what came next. By the time Joey Merlino reached his early 30s, power no longer looked the way it once had in Philadelphia. It didn't wear flashy suits or travel with entourages. It didn't shout commands or demand loyalty at gunpoint. Power had learned how to whisper, and Joey Merlino understood this better than almost anyone around him. What set Joey apart during this phase of his rise was not ambition, but control. He had seen what unchecked ambition did to others. Men who rushed toward authority often exposed themselves, drawing attention from both rivals and law enforcement. Joey chose a different path. He allowed authority to come to him naturally, shaped by necessity rather than desire. When problems surfaced, people turned to him. When decisions stalled, they waited for his input. Over time, this dependence became a form of leadership. Philadelphia's criminal ecosystem had become fragmented. Arrests had removed experienced figures, leaving gaps that were difficult to fill. Younger members lacked patience. Older ones were cautious to the point of paralysis. Joey navigated between these extremes with remarkable balance. He neither rushed nor froze. Instead, he prioritized continuity. Operations continued without disruption. Money moved quietly. Relationships remained intact. Joey believed that the greatest threat was internal instability. Rivalries within the organization could do more damage than any external investigation. To prevent this, he focused on reducing friction. He limited unnecessary interactions between groups that didn't need to communicate. He clarified responsibilities so overlaps didn't become sources of conflict. These adjustments were subtle, but their impact was profound. One of Joey's most effective strategies was silence. He spoke less than those around him. But when he did, people listened. His words were measured, purposeful, and rarely emotional. This created an aura of certainty. Even when outcomes were uncertain, Joey's demeanor suggested confidence. That confidence became contagious. At the same time, Joey maintained strong personal relationships. He remembered details about people's lives, families, and concerns. This wasn't manipulation, it was awareness. In a world where many felt disposable, being seen mattered. Joey made people feel valued without making promises he couldn't keep. This strengthened loyalty in ways fear never could. Law enforcement scrutiny intensified during this period. Surveillance became more sophisticated. Informants grew bolder. Joey responded by tightening communication channels. He avoided phones whenever possible. Messages were delivered indirectly. Meetings became rare and purposeful. He understood that every word spoken carried weight, and unnecessary words were liabilities. Despite the pressure, Joey refused to let paranoia rule his decisions. He believed fear clouded judgment. Instead, he relied on preparation. He assumed everything could be monitored and acted accordingly. This mindset allowed him to remain calm, even under constant threat. Others noticed this composure and drew reassurance from it. Philadelphia itself continued to change. Old neighborhoods faced decline, while others reinvented themselves. Joey paid attention to these shifts, understanding that crime followed opportunity. He didn't chase expansion aggressively, but he adapted to changing conditions. Flexibility, he believed, was essential for survival. As Joey's influence grew, so did expectations. People looked to him not just for direction, but for protection. He responded by reinforcing boundaries. He made it clear what behavior was acceptable and what crossed the line. Enforcement was quiet but firm. Consequences existed, but they were handled discreetly. This reinforced order without spectacle. One of the defining aspects of Joey's leadership was his refusal to romanticize violence. While he understood its role in maintaining control, he viewed it as a last resort. Every violent act attracted attention, and attention invited consequences. Joey preferred solutions that preserved stability. This approach reduced chaos and prolonged survival. Trust, however, remained fragile. Joey never assumed loyalty was permanent. He evaluated relationships constantly, aware that pressure could change people. Rather than reacting emotionally to betrayal, he prepared for it strategically. Contingency plans existed for nearly every scenario. This foresight allowed him to absorb shocks without losing balance. As the mid-1990 seconds approached, Joey's role became undeniable. Decisions increasingly flowed through him, even when others held formal titles. Authority had shifted quietly, reshaped by circumstance rather than declaration. Those inside the organization understood this reality, even if it was never spoken aloud. Joey's personal life remained largely insulated from his public image. He avoided excess, understanding that indulgence created vulnerabilities. His lifestyle reflected discipline rather than dominance. This restraint reinforced his reputation as someone who thought long-term. What made Joey's rise particularly remarkable was its subtlety. There were no dramatic turning points, no single moment where power changed hands. Instead, authority accumulated gradually, built on trust, consistency, and an unwavering commitment to control. By the time anyone outside the inner circle realized what had happened, the structure was already in place. Philadelphia's underworld had adapted to survive a new era, and Joey stood at its center, not as a symbol of fear, but as a manager of balance. He had mastered the art of power without noise, leadership without spectacle, and as external pressure continued to mount, one truth became clear. The calm that surrounded Joey was not accidental. It was deliberate. It was practiced. And it was preparing him for challenges far greater than anything he had yet faced. Power, once it settles quietly, brings with it a different kind of burden. By the mid-1990 seconds, Joey Merlino had become the center of gravity within Philadelphia's underworld, even if the outside world hadn't fully caught on. Authority now flowed through him not because he demanded it, but because no one else could carry it with the same steadiness. Yet with that authority came constant pressure. Pressure that never slept, never relaxed, and never forgave mistakes. Joey understood that leadership was no longer about gaining control. That part had already happened. Now it was about maintaining balance in an environment designed to collapse. Every decision carried consequences that rippled outward. A single misstep could invite scrutiny, fracture alliances, or ignite internal conflict. Joey approached this reality with a mindset shaped by years of observation and restraint. He treated leadership not as a privilege, but as a responsibility that required constant vigilance. One of the greatest challenges Joey faced was expectation. Those beneath him expected protection, guidance, and stability. Those alongside him expected fairness and consistency. Those above him, where remnants of old leadership still existed, expected loyalty without challenge. Navigating these layers required precision. Joey couldn't afford to favor one group too heavily without alienating another. His solution was transparency without exposure, clear rules, predictable responses, and private enforcement. Meetings during this period became fewer but more intense. When Joey spoke, he addressed problems directly, without embellishment. He didn't offer false reassurance. Instead, he explained realities plainly. This honesty earned respect. People trusted him not because he promised success, but because he prepared them for consequences. In a world built on illusion, realism was refreshing. Law enforcement pressure continued to tighten. Investigations grew broader, and rumors of informants circulated constantly. Joey responded not with panic, but with structure. He reduced points of contact, limited shared knowledge, and encouraged independence within defined boundaries. Each person knew their role, and more importantly, knew what they didn't need to know. This compartmentalization reduced risk and reinforced discipline. Internally, tension still existed. Ambition didn't disappear simply because leadership stabilized. Some individuals wanted more influence, faster results, or personal recognition. Joey addressed these ambitions carefully. Rather than suppressing them outright, he redirected them into controlled responsibilities. Ambition, when guided, could be productive. When ignored, it became dangerous. Joey also recognized the emotional toll leadership took on those around him. Fear, uncertainty, and fatigue wore people down. He didn't dismiss these pressures. Instead, he acknowledged them quietly, offering reassurance through action rather than words. Support for families, consistency in decision-making, and a refusal to abandon those facing consequences strengthened loyalty more than any speech could. At the same time, Joey remained realistic about trust. He never forgot that pressure changed people. He prepared for betrayal not by obsessing over it, but by ensuring no single failure could dismantle the entire structure. Redundancy became a principle. Backup plans existed for every scenario. This foresight allowed him to remain composed even when unexpected problems emerged. Philadelphia's streets reflected the tension inside the organization. Economic uncertainty, shifting neighborhoods, and changing social dynamics created instability. Joey paid attention to these external factors, understanding that crime didn't exist in isolation. He adjusted strategies to align with reality rather than nostalgia. What worked in the past no longer applied automatically. Adaptation became essential. Despite his growing authority, Joey avoided isolation. He stayed connected to people on the ground, listening to concerns and observing patterns. This connection kept him informed and grounded. It also prevented the detachment that often led leaders to make decisions based on assumption rather than reality. One of Joey's defining traits during this period was patience under pressure. When faced with provocation, he delayed response. When confronted with uncertainty, he gathered information. This restraint often frustrated those who wanted immediate action. But over time, they recognized its value. Delayed decisions were rarely impulsive, and impulsive decisions were rarely survivable. The weight of leadership also shaped Joey personally. He became more guarded, more selective in his interactions. Trust was earned slowly, if at all. Yet this caution didn't harden him completely. He remained capable of empathy, understanding that leadership without humanity eventually collapsed under its own weight. As the decade progressed, Joey's position solidified further. Authority was no longer questioned internally. It was accepted as reality. This acceptance brought a new phase of challenge, visibility. Even without seeking attention, influence attracted notice. Joey prepared for this inevitability, by reinforcing discipline and minimizing exposure. What made this period particularly dangerous was its deceptive calm. On the surface, operations appeared stable. Internally, systems functioned smoothly, yet Joey understood that calm often preceded disruption. He remained alert, aware that stability could invite complacency. His vigilance never faded. Leadership, Joey believed, wasn't about dominance. It was about endurance. It was about surviving pressure without losing clarity. As the weight of the crown settled fully onto his shoulders, he carried it with the same quiet discipline that had defined his rise. Philadelphia's underworld had found its balance, but balance was never permanent. Forces beyond Joey's control were already shifting. The calm he maintained was not an ending, but a pause, a moment of breath before the next storm. Stability can be deceptive. When things appear quiet for too long, it often means forces are gathering just beyond view. By the late 1990 seconds, Joey Merlino sensed that the calm surrounding Philadelphia's underworld was temporary. The organization was functioning smoothly, decisions were respected, and internal conflict was minimal, but Joey knew this kind of balance never lasted. Pressure doesn't disappear. It shifts, condenses, and eventually finds a way to break through. Joey had learned to read subtle signs. A sudden increase in surveillance vans parked a little too close. Familiar faces becoming cautious, conversations shortening, eye contact lingering longer than usual. These weren't coincidences. They were signals, the kind that told a seasoned leader that attention was building, even if nothing had yet exploded. Rather than reacting outwardly, Joey responded inwardly. He reviewed structures, tightened protocols, and reassessed relationships. This wasn't done in panic, but with methodical calm. He understood that preparation, not reaction, determined survival. The goal wasn't to eliminate risk that was impossible, but to absorb it without collapse. One of the challenges Joey faced during this period was complacency among those beneath him. Success had created comfort, and comfort bred carelessness. Joey addressed this not with threats, but with reminders. Expectations were reinforced. Discipline was quietly reintroduced. Mistakes were corrected early, before they could grow. He believed leadership meant preventing failure, not punishing it after the fact. Law enforcement interest intensified subtly. There were no dramatic raids or public statements, but the pattern was clear. Investigations were becoming more focused, more patient. Joey recognized this approach. It was designed to wait people out, to let routine create vulnerability. He refused to let routine win. Communication became even more restricted. Joey emphasized the importance of discretion, reminding everyone that silence was not weakness, but protection. Information moved only when necessary, and always indirectly. The fewer people who knew details, the fewer details could be exposed. Internally, Joey also faced the challenge of ambition resurfacing. Stability had given some individuals confidence, and confidence sometimes turned into impatience. Joey observed these shifts carefully. Rather than confronting ambition head-on, he redirected it. Responsibility was given in controlled amounts. Authority was earned gradually. This approach prevented resentment while maintaining order. Philadelphia itself continued to evolve. Neighborhoods changed, economic pressures shifted, and opportunities emerged in unexpected places. Joey adapted without abandoning principles. He understood that flexibility kept an organization alive, but values kept it unified. Balancing the two required constant attention. The emotional weight of leadership grew heavier during this time. Joey carried not just his own risks, but those of everyone connected to him. Each decision affected families, futures, and freedom. He didn't take this lightly. Late nights became common, spent thinking through scenarios, considering consequences, and preparing for outcomes no one else could see yet. Despite the pressure, Joey maintained composure. He believed that visible anxiety weakened authority. If the leader appeared unsettled, uncertainty spread quickly. Joey's calm demeanor reassured those around him, even when they sensed trouble approaching. Confidence, he knew, was contagious. One of the most difficult aspects of this period was uncertainty. There were no clear threats, no visible enemies, just the knowledge that something was building. Joey resisted the urge to act prematurely. He understood that unnecessary movement could attract exactly the attention he wanted to avoid. Patience, once again, became his strongest weapon. Trust remained a constant concern. Joey evaluated relationships continuously, aware that pressure could turn allies into liabilities. He didn't accuse or confront without cause. Instead, he adjusted access, limited exposure, and ensured no single individual held enough information to cause irreversible damage. As days passed and nothing happened, the tension deepened rather than eased. Joey knew this pattern well. Silence before action was a familiar strategy. He prepared mentally for every possibility: arrests, betrayals, public scrutiny, without allowing those possibilities to dominate his thinking. Leadership during this phase wasn't about bold moves. It was about restraint, about knowing when not to act. Joey's ability to remain still, to let events unfold without forcing them, demonstrated a maturity that few possessed. He understood that survival often depended on what you chose not to do. The organization mirrored his restraint. Operations remained efficient but subdued. Visibility was minimized. Excess was eliminated. Every action had purpose. This discipline didn't eliminate risk, but it reduced vulnerability. As the storm signals grew stronger, Joey accepted an unavoidable truth. No matter how careful one was, pressure eventually demanded resolution. The question was never if something would happen, but when and how prepared one would be when it did. Joey didn't fear what was coming. Fear clouded judgment. Instead, he respected it. He treated impending disruption as part of the cycle, another test of endurance. The calm he maintained was not denial, but readiness. Philadelphia's underworld stood at the edge of change once again. The air was still, but heavy. And at the center of it all, Joey Merlino waited, not anxiously, not recklessly, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had already planned for the storm long before the first drop fell. The city of Philadelphia has always had corners where light struggles to reach. By the late 1990 seconds, those shadows were Joey Merlino's domain. Yet, they were far from empty. They were alive with opportunity, tension, and danger. Joey Merlino had spent years understanding that influence was not about volume. It was about control in the spaces most overlooked, the gaps most others ignored. In the stillness of the city's underworld, Joey's presence was everywhere, yet felt only subtly: a nod here, a whispered directive there, a calculated silence that spoke volumes. By this point, Joey's rise had made him a figure whose authority was rarely challenged openly. Most recognized the pattern. Discretion and patience translated into results. Decisions didn't need announcements. Operations didn't need headlines. Loyalty didn't need intimidation. People followed him because structure had replaced chaos under his guidance. But influence was not static. It had to be managed continuously. Every relationship, every business, and every neighborhood under his sphere required attention, even when it appeared untouched. One of Joey's most defining methods was his understanding of indirect influence. Power didn't always need to be asserted with confrontation. He preferred to operate through intermediaries, ensuring that outcomes aligned with his objectives while keeping himself insulated. If a dispute arose, he often let others handle the initial confrontation, while he positioned himself as the ultimate problem solver. This strategy minimized risk while maximizing control, creating a network of dependency that strengthened his position without creating unnecessary enemies. Joey also understood the value of reputation, not as something to flaunt, but as a tool to influence behavior silently. Across South Philadelphia, he was known for his calm decisiveness, but also for his fairness within the context of street rules. He didn't reward recklessness, nor did he punish minor missteps harshly. Those who worked with him knew the stakes were high, but outcomes were always consistent and predictable. Predictability in an unpredictable world became a currency more valuable than money. At the same time, he understood that influence could breed envy. Even within the organization, younger or ambitious members quietly tested boundaries. Joey responded not with anger, but with observation. He tracked actions, noted deviations, and adjusted responsibilities accordingly. This subtle realignment prevented escalation and kept potential threats contained. Ambition, when directed, was productive. Ambition, when uncontrolled, was dangerous. Joey ensured that most ambition served the organization, rather than undermined it. Outside the organization, Joey navigated Philadelphia's neighborhoods with the same quiet precision. Businesses, bars, and social hubs functioned as both revenue streams and intelligence centers. He understood that information flowed through everyday interactions. Observing patterns of life, movement, and conversation gave him insight into potential threats and opportunities alike. Even casual encounters provided valuable data, if interpreted correctly. Joey absorbed this knowledge without needing to intervene overtly. His presence in these spaces, though often invisible, carried authority. During this period, law enforcement scrutiny increased again, but Joey's strategies kept him largely untouchable. Surveillance was countered with caution. Meetings were limited and indirect, and communication was compartmentalized. He minimized exposure without freezing operations. Even under the threat of federal attention, business and influence continued, quietly and efficiently. This careful balance further solidified his reputation as a leader who could maintain control under pressure. Joey also paid attention to the subtle interplay of fear and respect. He knew that fear without respect was fragile. Respect without fear could be exploited. The balance was delicate. He maintained it by blending restraint with assertiveness. Publicly, he appeared composed and measured. Privately, he ensured consequences for serious missteps were clear and enforceable. This duality created an aura of authority that few dared to test. Another critical component of Joey's control was his understanding of timing. He recognized that action at the wrong moment could undo years of careful work. When conflicts arose, whether territorial, financial, or personal, he didn't act immediately. He observed, calculated, and then moved decisively. Timing, he understood, was as powerful as any gun or negotiation tactic. A well-timed decision could neutralize a threat before it fully emerged. The 1,990 seconds also brought increased visibility for organized crime in popular culture. Movies, tabloids, and news outlets romanticized figures like Joey, though often inaccurately. While many sought attention, Joey treated such coverage with caution. He didn't correct misrepresentations openly, nor did he encourage exaggeration. Instead, he focused on controlling reality, the tangible network of influence, loyalty, and revenue, rather than perception alone. He knew that in his world, visibility could be a liability, if not handled carefully. During this era, Joey's network expanded not just horizontally, but vertically. He extended influence into legitimate businesses as well, understanding the value of integration. Restaurants, nightclubs, and small enterprises offered not just income, but intelligence and social leverage. Joey remained actively aware of these operations, ensuring they operated efficiently and discreetly. His ability to navigate both legal and illegal spheres simultaneously reinforced his strategic advantage. The most remarkable aspect of Joey's influence was its invisibility. Few outsiders could grasp the full extent of his control, and many insiders only realized the depth after consequences revealed themselves. Joey's approach created the illusion that everything operated independently, when in reality, the entire system was subtly aligned under his direction. This form of silent authority made him resilient to attacks, both legal and violent. By the end of the decade, Joey Merlino had become more than a man in control of a criminal organization. He had become a force, shaping the structure, behavior, and culture of Philadelphia's underworld itself. Influence had replaced brute power, observation had replaced force, and calculated restraint had replaced reckless ambition. In the shadows of the city, Joey's authority was absolute, though often invisible. And yet, with influence came responsibility. Every decision, every omission, and every interaction carried weight. Joey knew that maintaining control required constant attention. Power was not static, it demanded vigilance, adaptability, and foresight. The shadows he moved through were filled with opportunity, but also with risk. For every ally there could be a rival, for every gain there could be a loss. Survival was not guaranteed, but it could be earned through careful, calculated leadership. Philadelphia's streets whispered the presence of a man who had mastered both patience and influence. Quiet, disciplined, and watchful, Joey Merlino stood as the axis around which the city's underworld spun, and in the stillness of the late 1,990 seconds, even as the external world began to close in with law enforcement and rival pressures, Joey's command remained intact, poised for the challenges that inevitably lay ahead. By the turn of the millennium, Philadelphia's underworld was both more complex and more fragile than it had ever been. Joey Merlino had spent nearly a decade consolidating influence. But consolidation brought new challenges. Alliances that had once been reliable now required constant nurturing, and hidden battles, both internal and external, were emerging in subtle, dangerous forms. Power, Joey understood, was not merely about authority. It was about managing the intricate web of relationships that underpinned every operation. One of the first lessons Joey reinforced during this period was that alliances were never permanent, they were conditional. Trust could not be assumed, loyalty could not be taken for granted, and friendships could shift under pressure. Joey approached these realities with careful observation. He tracked behavior, noted deviations from expected patterns, and adjusted his approach accordingly. Those who proved dependable received greater responsibility, while those whose actions suggested unreliability were quietly reassigned or monitored more closely. This continuous evaluation created a dynamic but stable system, where influence was earned daily rather than assumed. While internal alliances required management, external threats were equally demanding. Rival organizations, emboldened by the weakening of other mafia factions in the Northeast, tested boundaries quietly. Encroachments on territories were rarely announced with fanfare. They occurred as subtle changes in control, small diversions or attempts to infiltrate existing networks. Joey responded with a combination of patience and decisiveness. He didn't confront every challenge directly. Sometimes he allowed rivals to expose themselves through miscalculations. Other times, he intervened with strategic moves designed to neutralize threats before they escalated. Joey's understanding of strategy extended beyond simple territorial control. He knew that influence was multidimensional. Financial streams, personal relationships, and social leverage were all interconnected. An attack on one aspect could destabilize the rest, if not managed carefully. By controlling these dimensions simultaneously, Joey ensured that both allies and rivals understood his position without the need for open confrontation. His power was pervasive, yet largely invisible, a hallmark of his leadership style. Internal dynamics, however, were the most delicate. Even among trusted lieutenants, ambition created tension. Some sought faster advancement, others coveted resources, and a few tested boundaries of loyalty. Joey did not respond impulsively. Instead, he redirected ambition into structured responsibilities. Promotions, responsibilities, and rewards were given based on demonstrated reliability and results, rather than entitlement or seniority. This approach minimized resentment while maintaining a high level of performance. During this period, Joey also developed a reputation for strategic generosity. He understood that loyalty was reinforced not only through discipline but through tangible support. Families of trusted associates received assistance quietly. Business partners and allies benefited from access, advice, and protection. These actions were never publicized. Their effect was cumulative. People within his sphere knew that Joey's support was dependable, and that this reliability was as important as any operational success. The late 1992 also introduced new technological challenges. The rise of digital communication meant that information could be intercepted more easily. Joey adapted quickly, emphasizing indirect communication, secure channels, and limited exposure. He remained a leader who understood that even a single careless conversation could unravel years of careful planning. His adaptability in this evolving landscape reinforced his reputation as someone who could survive and thrive even under unprecedented scrutiny. One of Joey's most critical strategies during this phase was observation. He watched interactions, listened carefully, and identified patterns that others overlooked. This included monitoring allies for signs of stress, frustration, or wavering loyalty. It included assessing rivals' tactics and calculating potential weaknesses. Every meeting, every transaction, and every conversation was an opportunity to gather intelligence. Joey's ability to remain aware of subtle signals gave him a strategic advantage few could contest. Philadelphia itself was shifting as well. Neighborhoods once dominated by traditional mafia structures were evolving, with new opportunities emerging for revenue streams in nightlife, real estate, and small enterprises. Joey integrated these opportunities into his operations cautiously. Expansion was never reckless, it was always calculated, ensuring that the organization's influence grew without creating exposure. He understood that rapid growth could attract attention and invite instability. Gradual, controlled expansion was far more sustainable. Despite the growing complexity, Joey maintained discipline within his inner circle. Meetings were structured, expectations were clear, and accountability was emphasized. Mistakes were addressed promptly but discreetly, preserving morale and minimizing exposure. This consistent approach reinforced loyalty and ensured that the organization remained cohesive even under external and internal pressures. Alliances were tested as the pressure of competition increased. Other factions in Philadelphia, aware of Joey's growing dominance, attempted subtle maneuvers to disrupt his influence. These maneuvers often involved manipulation, misinformation, or attempts to sway individuals from his circle. Joey anticipated these tactics and responded strategically, neutralizing threats before they escalated into overt conflict. His ability to anticipate moves allowed him to maintain control while rivals floundered. One of the most critical elements of Joey's success was his restraint and response. He avoided impulsive reactions that could escalate tensions unnecessarily. Instead, he assessed each situation, weighing risk and opportunity. When action was required, it was decisive and controlled. This balance between patience and assertiveness reinforced his position as a leader capable of navigating uncertainty. By the end of this phase, Joey Merlino had not only consolidated his authority but had also strengthened the organization's resilience. Alliances were carefully maintained, internal ambition was channeled productively, and external threats were managed with strategic foresight. His leadership was defined not by spectacle, but by subtlety, precision, and an unwavering focus on stability. The Philadelphia underworld, while complex and pressured, remained under his influence. Joey had transformed from a rising figure into the linchpin of the city's organized crime network, capable of navigating both visible and hidden battles with skill that few could match. The storm had not yet arrived, but Joey was prepared not with fear, but with strategy, patience, and control. By the early 2000s, the landscape of Philadelphia's underworld had shifted again. Joey Merlino had spent years solidifying influence, managing alliances, and consolidating control. Yet even the most disciplined leader could not escape the tightening grip of law enforcement. Investigations had grown more sophisticated, intelligence networks more connected, and federal agencies more patient. The noose wasn't yet visible, but Joey felt its presence, a subtle pressure that demanded vigilance, adaptability, and careful decision-making. Joey understood the stakes better than most. Arrests, indictments, and convictions had reshaped the mafia landscape across the Northeast. Philadelphia's traditional structures had weakened, creating both opportunity and risk. Joey's rise had been quietly strategic, but with increased attention came increased scrutiny. He knew that every operation, every interaction, and every decision was being watched, whether openly or through hidden channels. This awareness influenced not just his actions, but the behavior of everyone around him. One of Joey's key adaptations during this time was the tightening of operational security. Communication channels were minimized, meetings were restricted, and information flow was compartmentalized. Only those with a proven track record received access to sensitive matters, and even they were often given information in pieces rather than as a whole. Joey recognized that the fewer people who knew the full scope of an operation, the fewer points of failure existed. It was a lesson learned from observing the downfall of other organizations, and he applied it relentlessly. At the same time, Joey reinforced the loyalty of his inner circle. In a world under surveillance, trust became even more valuable. He ensured that those closest to him knew they were supported, not through words alone, but through action. Financial assistance for families, protection from external threats, and subtle advocacy within the organization created bonds that were hard to break. Loyalty in this environment wasn't just voluntary, it was nurtured carefully, making betrayal less likely. Philadelphia's neighborhoods reflected the same tension. Economic changes, gentrification in certain areas, and shifts in nightlife and entertainment created both opportunities and vulnerabilities. Joey's influence extended into these spheres. Nightclubs, small businesses, and social hubs became both revenue sources and intelligence networks. Joey managed them with discretion, ensuring that operations remained profitable while minimizing exposure. His awareness of the city's changing dynamics allowed him to adapt strategies that balanced growth with security. Even with careful management, threats emerged from rivals and opportunists. Some individuals tested boundaries quietly, seeking to capitalize on perceived weaknesses. Joey didn't respond impulsively. Instead, he observed behavior, assessed risk, and acted only when necessary. When intervention was required, it was precise and calculated, neutralizing threats before they escalated. This approach reduced public conflict, preserved alliances, and reinforced the perception that Joey's authority was both inevitable and unchallengeable. Law enforcement efforts were subtle but relentless. Surveillance, undercover operations, and informants created an environment where mistakes could be fatal. Joey understood that survival required both discipline and foresight. He minimized risk by delegating operations, limiting exposure, and maintaining a strategic presence rather than visibility. This calculated approach allowed him to operate effectively even under the pressure of ongoing investigation. During this period, Joey also became increasingly aware of the psychological dimensions of power. Influence was not solely about control of operations. It was about perception, intimidation, and expectation. He maintained a public image of calm authority, ensuring that even subtle movements or decisions conveyed confidence. This psychological presence reinforced loyalty internally and discouraged rivals from testing boundaries. Joey understood that reputation was as critical as action, often more so. One of the most challenging aspects of this period was managing fear both within himself and among his associates. Fear was inevitable. Law enforcement pressure, rival factions, and potential betrayal created constant tension. Joey did not allow fear to dictate his actions. Instead, he converted it into careful planning, disciplined observation, and measured decision-making. His composure under pressure became a stabilizing force for those around him. Joey also focused on the long game. Immediate gains or rapid expansion could attract unwanted attention. Instead, he emphasized sustainable influence, gradual growth, and strategic patience. Every decision was filtered through a lens of long-term impact, ensuring that the organization remained resilient even as external threats increased. This foresight allowed him to navigate uncertainty while maintaining authority. During this time, Joey became acutely aware that even the most loyal allies could falter under pressure. He reinforced structures that distributed responsibility while maintaining oversight. Delegation became a tool for both efficiency and protection. By creating layers of accountability, Joey ensured that the organization could withstand disruptions without collapsing. This approach minimized exposure and reinforced the perception that he controlled every aspect of operations, even when he allowed others to act independently. Philadelphia's underworld, while outwardly stable, was in a constant state of tension. Rival factions, economic shifts, and law enforcement pressure created a delicate equilibrium. Joey's leadership relied on balancing these forces, preventing crises, and exploiting opportunities quietly. His ability to operate in this complex environment, without drawing unnecessary attention, set him apart from many contemporaries who relied on aggression or spectacle. The late 1990s and early 2000s became a period of consolidation, preparation, and observation. Joey Merlino, operating in the shadows of law enforcement, scrutiny, rival factions, and internal ambition, maintained control with remarkable precision. His influence was extensive yet invisible, disciplined yet adaptive. He had learned that survival in Philadelphia's underworld required more than power. It demanded foresight, patience, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Even as the tightening noose of investigation loomed, Joey stood ready. He knew that challenges were inevitable, that storms would come, and that crises could strike at any moment. Yet, with every decision, every strategic move, and every careful calculation, he strengthened his organization, his influence, and his resilience. The shadows around him were filled with uncertainty, but within those shadows, Joey's authority remained unshaken, a quiet, omnipresent force prepared for whatever lay ahead. As the new millennium progressed, Joey Merlino had moved beyond the phase of simple influence. By now, his authority was pervasive, but maintaining it required more than strength. It required subtle consolidation. The Philadelphia underworld was a web of relationships, expectations, and risks, and Joey understood that even the slightest imbalance could unravel years of careful planning. His leadership had evolved into something more sophisticated than raw power. It was control through structure, reputation, and the unspoken rules of loyalty. Consolidation meant different things in Joey's world. It wasn't about claiming every street corner or overtly asserting dominance. It was about ensuring that the network beneath him functioned predictably, efficiently, and loyally. Every operation, from legitimate business ventures to underground dealings, had to be aligned with the organization's long-term stability. Joey approached this task like a strategist rather than a traditional crime boss, understanding that micromanagement was less effective than cultivating reliable systems. The foundation of his authority remained the code of silence, omerta. While outsiders romanticized this principle, Joey knew its practical importance. Secrets were currency. Information, when misused, could destroy entire networks. He reinforced this code not through fear alone, but by building a culture where loyalty and discretion were respected and rewarded. Violations were rare because trust was reinforced daily, and people knew the consequences for betrayal were calculated, precise, and inescapable. At the same time, Joey had to manage the inevitable friction between ambition and authority. Younger members of the organization, emboldened by his success, sought opportunities to assert themselves. Joey's approach was methodical. He observed ambition, redirected energy into productive channels, and created pathways for advancement that benefited both the individual and the organization. This tactic prevented conflict before it could emerge openly, ensuring that ambition fueled growth rather than division. Consolidation also extended to alliances outside the immediate organization. Joey understood that power depended not only on internal cohesion but on external influence. Partnerships with other crime figures, business leaders, and neighborhood operators were cultivated carefully. Joey ensured that these alliances were mutually beneficial, but never placed himself at unnecessary risk. By balancing cooperation with caution, he reinforced his network's strength without creating vulnerabilities. Philadelphia itself was changing, and Joey adapted seamlessly. Gentrification, shifting economic patterns, and new business opportunities altered traditional power dynamics. Joey recognized that influence in this environment required both subtlety and flexibility. He maintained dominance not by overt force, but by understanding the flow of the city, predicting shifts in opportunity, and positioning his organization to take advantage without drawing attention. A critical aspect of consolidation during this period was financial management. Joey ensured that the organization's revenue streams were diversified, discreet, and resilient. Investments were made in legitimate enterprises that provided cover, while underground operations continued to generate steady income. Profits were managed with precision, ensuring that funds could support both operations and loyalty. This balance between risk and stability became a hallmark of his leadership style. Even as the organization stabilized, external pressures continued. Law enforcement remained vigilant, employing both technology and informants to monitor operations. Joey responded not with panic but with discipline. Security protocols were constantly updated, communications were compartmentalized, and exposure was minimized. This careful attention allowed the organization to operate effectively while reducing the probability of disruption. Internal stability was equally important. Joey implemented structures that distributed authority but maintained oversight. Leaders within his organization were accountable for their actions, but Joey remained the ultimate arbiter. This layered approach created redundancy. No single point of failure could threaten the system. Even if an operation faltered or a member acted improperly, the organization could absorb the shock without collapse. Another key to consolidation was Joey's emphasis on psychological influence. His presence alone conveyed authority. People knew that decisions would be fair, consequences would be consistent, and loyalty would be rewarded. This perception reinforced obedience without overt coercion. Joey's leadership was built as much on respect and reputation as on enforcement, a combination that created stability in a world often defined by chaos. The period also tested his ability to maintain calm under mounting pressure. Investigations intensified, rival factions probed for weakness, and internal dynamics required constant management. Joey's response was strategic patience. He allowed events to unfold, assessed the situation, and then acted decisively where necessary. Impulsive reactions, he knew, could unravel years of careful planning. His restraint reinforced his authority, demonstrating that he controlled outcomes, even when circumstances were uncertain. During this time, Joey also recognized the importance of mentorship within his ranks. He guided promising associates, teaching them the value of patience, observation, and loyalty. By cultivating capable lieutenants, he ensured the organization's resilience while minimizing his direct exposure. Delegation became a strategic tool rather than a sign of weakness, allowing him to focus on critical decisions and broader strategy. By the mid-2000s, Joey Merlino had solidified his position not only as a dominant figure in Philadelphia's criminal network, but as an innovator in how organized crime could adapt to a modern, surveilled world. His authority was pervasive yet subtle, enforced through a combination of loyalty, discipline, reputation, and strategic foresight. The organization operated efficiently, conflicts were managed before they escalated, and revenue streams remained stable despite external scrutiny. Consolidation also reinforced Joey's long-term vision. He understood that maintaining control required continuous adaptation, constant vigilance, and a balance of power, loyalty, and influence. Philadelphia's underworld had survived decades of disruption, and under his guidance, it had become stronger, more organized, and more resilient. Even in moments of apparent calm, Joey remained aware that no system was permanent. Threats, both internal and external, were inevitable, and the organization's survival depended on foresight, discipline, and the careful management of people and resources. In this complex and high-pressure environment, Joey's ability to consolidate power, enforce loyalty, and anticipate challenges distinguished him as a leader whose influence extended far beyond immediate operations. Philadelphia's criminal world, now tightly structured under Joey's guidance, was ready for the challenges of a new era. Alliances were stable, operations efficient, and loyalty cultivated carefully. Yet Joey knew that true authority required more than control. It required preparation, vigilance, and the foresight to anticipate disruption before it arrived. In the quiet of the city's underworld, his presence was felt, his influence absolute, and his control both subtle and unshakable. By the mid-2000s, the Philadelphia underworld under Joey Merlino had achieved a fragile equilibrium. Loyalty had become the backbone of the organization, yet Joey knew that loyalty was rarely unconditional. Maintaining allegiance required constant effort, negotiation, and, occasionally, calculated discipline. The stakes were higher than ever, and the cost of misjudging loyalty could be catastrophic. Joey understood the human element behind allegiance. People were motivated by fear, respect, ambition, and need. Each operative within his network had a personal world: family, debts, ambitions, and vulnerabilities. Joey paid attention to these details, knowing that understanding motivations allowed him to manage them effectively. He created systems that rewarded fidelity and productivity, while subtly monitoring for signs of wavering commitment. Trust was neither assumed nor demanded. It was nurtured, observed, and tested when necessary. The organization's success brought new challenges. As operations grew more complex, the potential for internal friction increased. Rivalries, envy, and ambition emerged quietly. Joey responded with subtle adjustments, reassigning responsibilities, redirecting ambition into productive channels, and rewarding those who demonstrated reliability. He understood that visible displays of authority could alienate ambitious individuals, whereas quiet management reinforced respect and obedience. Financial security also played a role in loyalty. Joey ensured that those closest to him, and those who demonstrated consistency, were protected financially. Families were provided for, obligations were met, and benefits extended discreetly. These actions were not displays of generosity but tools of influence. People understood that loyalty under Joey's leadership was rewarded tangibly, strengthening bonds without overt coercion. Yet even with careful management, threats to loyalty were constant. Law enforcement pressure created opportunities for betrayal. The threat of indictment or imprisonment could tempt even the most reliable associates to cooperate with authorities. Joey recognized these risks and mitigated them through compartmentalization. Information was distributed in fragments, ensuring that no one individual had complete knowledge of operations or the full scope of the network. This strategy minimized vulnerabilities and reinforced loyalty through structure rather than fear alone. Philadelphia's criminal environment was not static. Economic changes, neighborhood redevelopment, and shifts in public perception required constant adaptation. Joey used these dynamics to reinforce loyalty. Opportunities for profit, access, and influence were tied to adherence to the organization's rules and values. Those who aligned themselves with the system prospered. Those who deviated faced quiet but effective consequences. Personal loyalty was also reinforced through psychological understanding. Joey paid attention to demeanor, language, and subtle behavioral cues. Those who acted out of desperation or frustration were often guided back toward alignment rather than punished immediately. Those who displayed ambition or impatience were channeled into responsibilities that served both their interests and the organization's stability. This nuanced approach created loyalty not through fear alone but through mutual benefit and respect. Despite these strategies, Joey was not naive about human nature. He recognized that loyalty could waver, and betrayal could emerge unexpectedly. He prepared for these eventualities with contingency planning, secondary chains of command, redundancy in operations, and careful monitoring of sensitive matters ensured that a single act of disloyalty would not collapse the organization. His leadership depended on resilience, not just influence. The culture of loyalty also extended outward. Partnerships with external operators, allied crime figures, and business associates were cultivated with the same strategic care. Joey ensured that these relationships were mutually beneficial, and that all parties understood the value of trust, discretion, and cooperation. Reputation and consistency reinforced these bonds, ensuring that alliances were stable even in times of pressure. Internal enforcement was subtle yet effective. Disputes were resolved quietly, and consequences were precise rather than public. Joey believed that visible displays of punishment often created resentment and fear, whereas discreet discipline reinforced respect and obedience. Those who observed the system understood that actions had consequences, and that loyalty carried both privileges and responsibilities. The psychological burden of leadership weighed heavily. Joey carried the responsibility not just for operations and revenue, but for the lives, security, and futures of those connected to him. Decisions had to balance immediate results with long-term consequences. Mistakes could have cascading effects. He approached each decision with calculation, patience, and awareness of the human element. Leadership was not a position to be flaunted but a responsibility to be managed. By the end of this period, the cost of loyalty had become clear. It required mutual respect, consistency, careful management, and constant attention. Joey Merlino had created an organization that rewarded fidelity, mitigated betrayal, and cultivated trust through action rather than rhetoric. Loyalty under his guidance was neither blind nor unconditional. It was deliberate, strategic, and enforceable. Philadelphia's underworld operated efficiently, quietly, and resiliently. Internal cohesion remained strong despite external pressures, rival factions, and law enforcement scrutiny. Joey's ability to navigate these complexities, maintaining loyalty while managing ambition, fear, and opportunity, reinforced his position as the city's central authority. His leadership demonstrated that influence was not merely about power, but about understanding the human element that sustained it. Even in moments of calm, Joey remained vigilant. Loyalty, he knew, was fragile. Survival depended on foresight, observation, and the consistent application of strategy. In the shadows of Philadelphia, authority under Joey Merlino was absolute, tempered by the understanding that every relationship carried risk, and that every act of loyalty had a cost, but one that, when managed wisely, ensured resilience, control, and enduring influence. By the mid-2000s, Joey Merlino had solidified his position as the undisputed authority in Philadelphia's underworld. Joey Merlino had spent more than a decade building a network of influence that was as resilient as it was pervasive. Yet with control came a price, a constant tension between visibility and invisibility, between power and vulnerability. Joey understood that leadership in this world was not a static achievement. It was a continual negotiation with risk, loyalty, and opportunity. Control, Joey knew, required more than authority. It demanded constant awareness of the forces that could destabilize the organization. Law enforcement, rival factions, and even internal ambition were never dormant. Each element had to be managed carefully, not through brute force alone, but through strategic oversight, discretion, and calculated action. Joey's leadership style had evolved to balance these pressures with precision, blending patience with decisiveness. One of the most significant aspects of maintaining control was the management of perception. Joey understood that authority was as much about how others saw him as it was about the reality of his power. Reputation had to convey decisiveness, consistency, and omnipresence, even when he remained physically distant from operations. This psychological element of leadership created compliance without constant enforcement, reducing the need for overt displays of force. Internal management was a constant challenge. Ambition and ego were ever-present threats. Even trusted lieutenants could misstep or overreach, and the consequences of unchecked ambition could ripple throughout the organization. Joey addressed this with a combination of observation, and structured delegation. Responsibilities were assigned based on reliability and performance, while potential rivals were given tasks that required focus and accountability. This approach allowed the organization to function efficiently while minimizing disruption from internal competition. Financial control was equally critical. Joey ensured that revenue streams were diversified, secure, and discreet. Illegal enterprises operated under tight operational protocols, while legitimate businesses provided both cover and supplementary income. Funds were allocated strategically to reward loyalty, support families, and maintain operational stability. This approach not only reinforced internal cohesion, but also created practical incentives for compliance. Joey's network extended beyond the immediate organization. Relationships with allied crime figures, business partners, and neighborhood operators were cultivated strategically. These external alliances were critical for influence, intelligence, and revenue. Joey managed them with a blend of respect and caution, ensuring that each alliance was mutually beneficial while limiting exposure to risk. By maintaining these connections, he expanded his control without overextending or attracting undue attention. Law enforcement scrutiny remained a constant pressure. Investigations were sophisticated and patient, often operating in the shadows. Joey responded with operational discipline, minimizing exposure through compartmentalized communication, indirect decision-making, and limited visibility. By controlling what information could be intercepted and who had access to it, he reduced vulnerabilities while maintaining operational efficiency. Another dimension of control was the management of loyalty and discipline. Joey recognized that both were fragile under pressure. He reinforced loyalty not only through rewards but through calculated interventions when rules were broken. Discipline was applied subtly but decisively, reinforcing the organization's norms without creating unnecessary fear or resentment. Those who observed the system understood that rules were consistent and consequences inevitable. Further strengthening cohesion, the psychological dimension of leadership was increasingly important. Joey's presence alone carried authority. His calm demeanor, even under stress, reassured allies and warned rivals. He maintained composure while assessing risk, observing behavior, and predicting outcomes. This approach reinforced his perception as a leader whose authority was both inevitable and carefully managed, reducing challenges before they could escalate. External pressures also required strategic adaptability. Economic shifts, neighborhood transformations, and the evolving entertainment and nightlife sectors presented both opportunities and risks. Joey integrated these factors into operational planning, ensuring that the organization could adapt without exposing itself. Expansion and investment were measured, with risk minimized through careful oversight and strategic patience. One of the most critical aspects of Joey's control was his understanding of timing. Decisions were rarely rushed. Joey waited, observing developments, assessing risk, and calculating potential outcomes. When action was required, it was decisive and precise. This patience allowed him to neutralize threats effectively, maintain authority, and avoid unnecessary confrontation. Timing became a tool as powerful as any enforcement measure. The personal cost of control was considerable. Joey bore the responsibility for not just operations, but the safety, financial security, and stability of those connected to him. Every decision had consequences that could ripple through families, alliances, and neighborhoods. Mistakes could be catastrophic, requiring careful foresight and measured judgment. Leadership, Joey understood, was not a privilege, it was a continuous obligation. By this point, Joey Merlino's organization was both disciplined and adaptive. Internal structures were resilient, alliances were carefully managed, and operational protocols minimized vulnerability. Control extended into every dimension of influence, from financial management to psychological authority. Even under constant external scrutiny, Joey maintained stability through foresight, strategy, and disciplined leadership. Yet he understood that no system was impervious. Control demanded continuous attention, vigilance, and adaptation. Threats could emerge unexpectedly, and complacency was dangerous. Joey's approach blended authority, foresight, and subtlety, ensuring that power was maintained while minimizing exposure. His leadership was defined by both presence and discretion, decisiveness and patience, authority and subtlety. Philadelphia's underworld, under Joey's direction, had become a well-structured system capable of absorbing shocks and sustaining operations. Rival factions, law enforcement, and internal ambition were all managed effectively through a combination of strategy, foresight, and careful oversight. Joey's mastery of control ensured that the organization remained resilient, efficient, and influential, even as external pressures continued to mount. The price of control was high, but Joey had paid it in discipline, observation, and strategic foresight. In return, the organization operated smoothly, loyalty was maintained, and authority was unchallenged. The delicate balance between influence and risk defined Joey Merlino's leadership, marking him as a figure whose ability to manage Philadelphia's criminal network was both profound and enduring. By the late 2000s, Joey Merlino had developed an acute understanding that true power in Philadelphia's underworld extended beyond streets and social influence. It penetrated hidden fronts, legitimate enterprises, and the subtle levers of daily life. Joey had long recognized that visibility was a liability and that influence thrived in the spaces few noticed. The city's shadows were not empty. They were alive with opportunity, negotiation, and subtle conflict, all of which demanded constant attention. The era was defined by the duality of public calm and private complexity. Outwardly, Philadelphia appeared stable, with crime levels fluctuating within expected limits and the nightlife economy booming. Yet beneath this surface, Joey's organization operated as a sophisticated network, balancing revenue streams, alliances, and surveillance avoidance. Every business, from small bars to restaurants and nightclubs, served dual purposes: profit and intelligence. These hidden fronts were critical for maintaining control without attracting undue attention. Joey's strategy relied on compartmentalization. Each enterprise had a defined purpose and operated semi-independently. Managers and operatives were given responsibilities with clear boundaries, ensuring operational efficiency while limiting exposure to potential betrayal or law enforcement infiltration. The fewer people who knew the full scope of operations, the fewer vulnerabilities existed. This system of structured secrecy allowed Joey to maintain oversight without micromanaging every detail. Financial diversification became increasingly important. Traditional revenue streams were still active, but legitimate enterprises offered stability, cover, and access to additional resources. Joey understood that a balance between legality and illegality reduced scrutiny and provided flexibility. Investments in nightlife, entertainment, and small businesses not only generated revenue, but also expanded influence, creating networks of dependency that reinforced loyalty. Strategic alliances extended beyond the immediate organization. Joey cultivated relationships with business leaders, influential community figures, and external crime operators. Each alliance was carefully assessed for mutual benefit and potential risk. Cooperation was encouraged, but Joey maintained the upper hand by controlling critical information and ensuring that trust had tangible reinforcement. These relationships often operated quietly, unnoticed by the public, but they were essential for sustaining influence and operational freedom. The challenge of maintaining hidden fronts was constant vigilance. Even small missteps could expose operations to rival factions or law enforcement scrutiny. Joey maintained strict protocols for communication, surveillance, and financial management. He understood that in the modern era, technology and digital surveillance had changed the landscape. Discretion required not only physical caution, but careful attention to how information could be intercepted, observed, or exploited. Internal management within these fronts required discipline and observation. Managers were expected to operate autonomously but within clearly defined parameters. Deviations were addressed discreetly, often through mentorship or reassignment rather than confrontation. Joey believed that subtle correction reinforced loyalty more effectively than overt punishment. People understood that errors were noted, evaluated, and adjusted in a manner consistent with the organization's rules. The psychological dimension of hidden influence was equally important. Joey cultivated an aura of omnipresence. People knew he was aware, even if he was not physically present. This perception maintained discipline and deterred subversion. Operatives were motivated by both respect for his authority and recognition of the tangible benefits of loyalty. The combination of oversight and reward created a self-regulating system that reinforced operational stability. Rival factions tested these systems continuously. Attempts to infiltrate businesses, exploit weaknesses, or sway personnel occurred quietly and methodically, Joey countered these threats with observation, intelligence gathering, and strategic intervention. He rarely acted prematurely. Instead, he allowed patterns to reveal themselves, then neutralized threats with precision. Timing and subtlety were always his allies. Joey also recognized the importance of adaptability. Philadelphia's neighborhoods were changing rapidly, with gentrification, redevelopment, and shifts in population altering traditional power structures. Hidden fronts provided flexibility. They could adapt to new economic realities, relocate discreetly, or shift operational focus without attracting attention. Joey's foresight ensured that these enterprises remained both profitable and secure, even as the city evolved around them. During this period, Joey's personal vigilance intensified. He reviewed financial records, operational reports, and neighborhood intelligence personally. Even small anomalies were investigated, ensuring that no vulnerability went unnoticed. His leadership relied not on constant intervention but on awareness. He allowed managers autonomy while maintaining ultimate authority, ensuring both efficiency and security. Hidden fronts also became essential for information gathering. Bars, restaurants, and other venues offered insight into community sentiment, rival movements, and law enforcement activity. Joey observed patterns in attendance, conversation, and behavior, turning ordinary operations into intelligence hubs. Knowledge became a weapon, and those who underestimated it often found themselves unprepared for the consequences. By the end of this phase, Joey Merlino had transformed Philadelphia's underworld into a network of visible operations and hidden fronts, each reinforcing the other. Influence was pervasive, authority respected, and loyalty reinforced through tangible benefits and subtle oversight. Rival factions in law enforcement faced an organization that was disciplined, adaptive, and difficult to penetrate. Joey's mastery lay in his ability to operate quietly, strategically, and with a constant eye on both opportunity and risk. Philadelphia's streets, nightclubs, and businesses concealed an intricate system of control. Joey's leadership was defined not by spectacle, but by the subtle orchestration of influence, loyalty, and operations across multiple dimensions. In this environment, his authority was absolute, though rarely seen. The hidden fronts were the lifeblood of his organization, silent, efficient, and resilient. Even as the city's environment evolved, Joey remained vigilant. Threats could emerge suddenly. Rivals could act unexpectedly. Law enforcement pressure could increase. Yet his network of hidden fronts, disciplined personnel, and strategic alliances ensured that the organization could absorb shocks and maintain stability. Joey's influence was both profound and enduring, a quiet force shaping Philadelphia's underworld with precision, foresight, and unwavering control. By the early 2010 seconds, Joey Merlino had perfected the delicate balance between visibility and discretion, influence and restraint. The Philadelphia underworld had become a sophisticated network under his direction, with operations spanning both legitimate and illicit enterprises. Yet even the most disciplined and controlled systems required risk. Joey understood that survival and growth were never guaranteed. They demanded calculated moves, strategic timing, and an unwavering awareness of consequences. Risk, in Joey's world, was never impulsive. Every decision was measured against multiple potential outcomes. Expanding a business, asserting influence over a rival territory, or managing internal disputes was approached with strategic foresight. Joey analyzed patterns of behavior, studied potential vulnerabilities, and anticipated reactions before committing to action. This approach minimized exposure while maximizing potential reward, turning risk into a tool rather than a liability. Internal risks were the most complex. Even the most loyal associates could falter under temptation, pressure, or ambition. Joey mitigated this by structuring responsibilities carefully, compartmentalizing sensitive information, and rewarding reliability. Observing behavior was key. He knew that subtle shifts in attitude, hesitation in decision-making, or unusual interactions could signal the early stages of betrayal or misalignment. By acting proactively, Joey neutralized potential problems before they escalated. Financial risk was another constant concern. The organization's revenue streams were diverse, but fluctuations in illicit activities or legitimate investments could create vulnerability. Joey ensured redundancy and security in operations. Profits from nightclubs, restaurants, and entertainment venues were reinvested wisely, while underground revenue provided flexibility. Each financial decision was calculated to preserve stability, maintain loyalty, and avoid unnecessary exposure. Rival factions presented external risks that required constant vigilance. Philadelphia's underworld was not a monolith. It was a patchwork of competing interests, opportunists, and remnants of old power structures. Joey observed rival movements carefully, assessing their intentions, strengths, and weaknesses. In many cases, he allowed rivals to act, using their miscalculations to strengthen his position. When direct intervention was necessary, it was swift, precise, and measured to achieve objectives without unnecessary attention. The psychological aspect of calculated risk was equally critical. Joey understood that perception could be as powerful as action, demonstrating calm decisiveness, projecting control even in uncertain situations, and maintaining the appearance of omnipresence influenced both allies and adversaries. People knew he was aware of potential threats and capable of acting with precision. This reputation served as both deterrent and reinforcement, reducing the likelihood of open challenges. Technological change added complexity to risk management. Digital communication, surveillance, and data tracking created vulnerabilities that had not existed in previous decades. Joey adapted by emphasizing indirect communication, limiting exposure, and monitoring information flow carefully. Operational security became as much about behavior and observation as it was about financial or territorial control. The modern era demanded vigilance in ways previous generations had never experienced. Timing was a crucial element in risk assessment. Joey rarely acted immediately. Instead, he allowed situations to develop, monitoring patterns and gathering intelligence before making decisions. Patience often revealed the true nature of threats and opportunities. By waiting, he reduced the likelihood of errors while increasing the effectiveness of interventions. When action was taken, it was deliberate, precise, and irreversible, reinforcing both authority and operational stability. Joey also recognized that risk carried opportunity. Expanding influence into new areas, acquiring strategic assets, and negotiating alliances often required exposure. However, calculated risk allowed him to convert potential vulnerabilities into advantages. Strategic moves were always framed with a broader objective in mind: strengthening the organization, consolidating loyalty, and maintaining long-term control. Internal cohesion was maintained by managing ambition and expectations. High-performing associates were given opportunities that challenged them while benefiting the organization. Those who exhibited potential for disruption were reassigned or observed more closely. This approach allowed Joey to channel energy into productive avenues, preventing conflict before it could destabilize operations. Loyalty was reinforced through opportunity as much as through oversight. External pressures required similar discipline. Rival factions and law enforcement efforts could expose weaknesses if not anticipated. Joey's strategy involved layered observation, discrete intelligence gathering, and selective intervention. By understanding the broader dynamics at play, he could act in ways that reinforced authority while minimizing attention. Threats were neutralized, not dramatized, preserving stability and reputation. The personal cost of calculated risk was significant. Joey bore responsibility for the organization's outcomes, the safety of associates, and the security of families connected to his network. Each decision had cascading effects, requiring foresight, patience, and careful judgment. Mistakes could result in financial loss, operational disruption, or exposure to legal consequences. The weight of leadership demanded both discipline and adaptability. By this phase, Joey Merlino's Philadelphia network had become both resilient and adaptable. Operations were structured, loyalty reinforced, and external pressures mitigated through observation and strategic action. Risk was not avoided. It was managed deliberately, converted into opportunity, and employed to strengthen control. Joey's mastery lay in his ability to anticipate threats, measure consequences, and act with precision, ensuring that the organization could withstand challenges and continue to thrive. The organization's stability was a reflection of Joey's leadership: disciplined, observant, strategic, and resilient. Rival factions, law enforcement, and internal ambition had been mitigated through foresight, structure, and influence. Philadelphia's underworld, under Joey's direction, operated quietly, efficiently, and with a controlled presence, making the city both predictable and malleable under his influence. Even as the risks evolved, Joey remained prepared. He understood that the nature of organized crime was perpetual adaptation. Threats would continue, challenges would arise, and the landscape would shift. Yet through calculated action, strategic observation, and disciplined management, Joey ensured that his organization not only survived, but remained dominant. The cost of control was high, but the rewards, stability, influence, and authority were enduring. By the mid-2010 seconds, Joey Merlino had transformed Philadelphia's criminal landscape into a complex web of influence, where authority extended far beyond direct control of operations. Joey understood that power was not only about territory, revenue, or enforcement. It was about shaping behavior, expectations, and perceptions throughout the city. Influence in his hands became a silent yet formidable force that reinforced both loyalty and authority. Joey's network functioned like a vast organism. Each individual, business, and territory was a node in an interconnected system designed to respond predictably under his guidance. Loyalty, compliance, and efficiency were embedded in every interaction. Even minor decisions had ripple effects across the organization. Joey's genius lay in understanding these interconnections, ensuring that small actions reinforced broader objectives while minimizing unintended consequences. At the heart of this web was information. Joey treated knowledge as both a shield and a weapon. Observing human behavior, monitoring communication, and interpreting subtle cues allowed him to anticipate threats before they materialized. Intelligence was gathered not only from direct sources but from hidden patterns, business interactions, social gatherings, and neighborhood developments. Every piece of data was evaluated for its potential impact on influence, control, and strategy. Internal relationships required constant attention. Ambition, jealousy, and personal grievances could disrupt cohesion if left unchecked. Joey managed these dynamics through strategic assignments, compartmentalization of sensitive information, and subtle guidance. Individuals were rewarded for reliability and foresight, while potential disruptors were redirected into roles that aligned their ambition with organizational goals. This approach created a system where loyalty and productivity reinforced each other. The external component of influence extended across rival factions, legitimate business networks, and community institutions. Joey understood that perception mattered as much as reality. Subtle acts, quiet negotiations, discreet mediation, and strategic generosity shaped the behavior of allies and competitors alike. Influence was maintained not through overt aggression but through controlled presence, strategic decisions, and careful observation. Those who underestimated his reach often discovered the limits of their autonomy too late. Philadelphia's neighborhoods reflected Joey's web of influence. Businesses, clubs, and social hubs functioned as both revenue sources and intelligence centers. He observed patterns in economic activity, social interactions, and local politics, integrating this information into operational strategy. By controlling key nodes, he indirectly shaped behavior across the city. People adjusted their actions based on perceived authority, demonstrating compliance even when direct enforcement was unnecessary. Financial influence remained central to his strategy. Revenue streams were diversified across legal and illegal enterprises, creating stability and resilience. Profits were allocated not only to operations but to reinforce loyalty through tangible benefits for associates and families. These allocations were deliberate, signaling trust, reward, and protection. The combination of financial security and psychological reinforcement created durable bonds that strengthened the organization's foundation. Joey's mastery of timing amplified his influence. Actions were carefully sequenced to maximize impact and minimize risk. Decisions were rarely rushed. He allowed situations to unfold, observed patterns, and acted when outcomes were clear and controllable. This patience reinforced perception of inevitability, making his interventions appear precise, calculated, and authoritative. Competitors and allies alike recognized the weight of his judgment, reinforcing his position without constant confrontation. Even subtle enforcement of rules became a tool of influence. Disputes, missteps, and potential breaches of loyalty were addressed quietly, often through mentorship, reassignment, or discreet warning. Joey avoided overt displays of power, understanding that subtlety reinforced obedience and minimized resentment. People within the organization internalized norms, self-regulated behavior, and aligned actions with broader objectives, essentially becoming instruments of the web itself. The web of influence also required flexibility. External pressures, such as law enforcement scrutiny or shifting economic conditions, demanded adaptation. Joey integrated these factors into decision-making, adjusting operations, alliances, and communication strategies accordingly. Adaptability ensured that influence remained effective, despite changing circumstances, preserving authority even in unpredictable environments. Rival factions tested the network constantly. Attempts to disrupt operations, challenge loyalty, or exploit weaknesses were met with careful observation rather than immediate confrontation. Joey allowed patterns to emerge, using intelligence and strategic interventions to neutralize threats efficiently. The ability to manage conflict without creating public turmoil enhanced his reputation, solidifying the perception of control across both allies and adversaries. Leadership within the web was reinforced through mentorship. Joey invested in developing capable lieutenants, teaching them the value of discretion, patience, and strategic thinking. Delegating responsibility created redundancy in operations, ensuring resilience while allowing Joey to focus on high-level strategy. Leadership became layered, with each tier reinforcing influence, stability, and continuity. The personal cost of sustaining this network was significant. Joey bore responsibility not only for operations but for the lives, security, and futures of countless associates and their families. Decisions had cascading effects, and mistakes could compromise the entire system. Yet through discipline, observation, and strategic foresight, Joey maintained resilience and control, reinforcing the organization's stability despite constant challenges. By the end of this period, Philadelphia's criminal network had become a structured, yet adaptable ecosystem dominated by Joey Merlino's influence. Operations ran efficiently, loyalty was reinforced, and rival factions were managed through a combination of perception, negotiation, and strategic action. Joey's mastery of influence was subtle but absolute, an omnipresent force that shaped the city without constant confrontation. The web of influence reflected Joey's leadership philosophy. Authority is most effective when it operates quietly, decisively, and strategically. Through observation, intelligence, mentorship, and calculated action, he ensured that Philadelphia's underworld remained disciplined, resilient, and aligned under his direction. The city's shadows concealed a network of power, loyalty, and opportunity, all orchestrated with precision. Joey Merlino's influence was both pervasive and enduring, a testament to the careful cultivation of authority in a complex, high-stakes world. By the late 2010 seconds, Joey Merlino had honed the delicate balance between power and subtlety, ensuring that Philadelphia's underworld operated as a disciplined network, guided by his influence. His authority was not demonstrated through constant displays of force. It was embedded in alliances, loyalty, and the perception of omnipresence. Joey understood that true control required not just dominance, but the careful cultivation of relationships that could withstand pressure, temptation, and scrutiny. Alliances were the lifeblood of the organization. Joey's network extended beyond immediate associates to include external operators, neighborhood leaders, and business figures, whose cooperation reinforced his influence. These relationships were carefully maintained, each serving dual purposes: operational benefit and strategic leverage. Joey ensured that every alliance was mutually beneficial, but he always retained the upper hand by controlling the flow of critical information and limiting exposure to risk. The management of loyalty remained central. Joey had long understood that loyalty was fragile and required constant reinforcement. Those closest to him received both tangible and intangible rewards: financial support, protection, and access to influence. Simultaneously, those who showed signs of wavering allegiance were quietly tested, redirected, or observed more closely. The organization functioned like a living organism. Loyalty and ambition were balanced through careful oversight and strategic intervention. Internal cohesion relied on discretion and subtlety. Conflicts were managed privately, often through mediation, reassignment, or mentorship, rather than public confrontation. Joey's philosophy emphasized correction over punishment, understanding that visible displays of authority could generate resentment. By addressing issues quietly, he maintained stability while reinforcing the perception of fairness, competence, and omniscience. Philadelphia itself remained a dynamic environment. Gentrification, economic shifts, and changes in nightlife and entertainment sectors altered traditional patterns of influence. Joey leveraged these transformations strategically. Businesses under his guidance were both revenue sources and intelligence hubs, providing insight into community sentiment, competitor activity, and law enforcement focus. Every enterprise functioned as a node in a broader system of observation, control, and influence. Financial operations were closely managed. Revenue streams from legal and illegal activities were diversified, ensuring stability while minimizing exposure. Joey's oversight ensured that profits reinforced loyalty, funded strategic initiatives, and maintained operational resilience. Discretion was paramount. Public perception remained controlled, ensuring that influence was subtle but pervasive. External rivals continued to test boundaries. Attempts to infiltrate operations, sway allies, or exploit vulnerabilities were met with observation and strategic countermeasures. Joey rarely acted impulsively. Instead, he allowed rivals to reveal intentions through behavior, timing, and decision-making patterns. Interventions, when necessary, were precise, discreet, and effective, neutralizing threats while maintaining the organization's stability and reputation. The psychological dimension of leadership became increasingly crucial. Joey's presence alone projected authority, calm decisiveness, awareness of subtleties, and measured responses influenced both allies and adversaries. Those within the network understood that his perception extended into areas unseen, creating compliance even when direct oversight was minimal. Reputation, in this environment, was as critical as operational control. Joey also cultivated adaptability within the organization. Leaders were trained to manage responsibilities independently, while adhering to core principles. This decentralized approach allowed the network to respond efficiently to emerging challenges while preserving cohesion. By developing capable lieutenants and empowering them strategically, Joey reduced the risk of operational collapse and reinforced his influence across multiple tiers. Alliances were tested in moments of crisis. Pressure from law enforcement, internal disputes, and economic shifts required careful negotiation. Joey navigated these situations with patience and strategy, ensuring that outcomes strengthened loyalty, reinforced authority, and minimized exposure. Even subtle interventions carried weight. Individuals recognized the consequences of misalignment and the benefits of alignment with Joey's vision. Strategic patience defined his approach. Decisions were rarely made in haste. Joey observed, analyzed, and calculated before acting. Timing was a tool as powerful as influence or authority, allowing him to maximize outcomes while minimizing risk. Actions taken at the right moment reinforced the perception of inevitability, discouraging challenge and fostering respect. The personal cost of leadership was evident. Joey bore responsibility not only for operational success, but for the safety, security, and stability of countless associates and their families. Mistakes could ripple through the network, causing disruption, financial loss, or exposure. Yet his discipline, foresight, and strategic planning ensured resilience. Authority was maintained not through recklessness, but through careful observation, management, and decisive action. The late 2010 seconds marked a period where Joey's influence extended across multiple dimensions. Philadelphia's underworld operated efficiently, alliances were stable, and loyalty was consistently reinforced. Rivals, law enforcement, and internal ambition were all mitigated through strategic observation, precise intervention, and the cultivation of influence. Joey's control was subtle yet absolute. His authority felt in quiet decisions and disciplined operations rather than public spectacle. By the end of this phase, the web of alliances Joey had cultivated had become the foundation of his enduring power. Relationships, observation, loyalty, and perception intertwined to create a resilient network capable of withstanding disruption, managing ambition, and navigating evolving challenges. Philadelphia's criminal ecosystem was both disciplined and adaptable, its influence pervasive yet discreet, a testament to Joey Merlino's mastery of subtle power, calculated action, and strategic foresight. Even in calm, Joey remained vigilant. He understood that the city, the economy, and rival factions were in constant flux. Authority was not a static achievement. It was maintained through constant observation, strategic action, and the careful management of relationships and perception. The shadows of Philadelphia, under Joey's guidance, were a landscape of control, influence, and resilience. Quiet, yet unmistakable. By the early 2022s, Joey Merlino had transformed reputation into one of the most potent tools in his arsenal. In the shadows of Philadelphia, where alliances, loyalty, and influence dictated survival, perception often outweighed action. Joey understood that authority could be both subtle and absolute when reinforced by an impeccable reputation. Those within the organization, allied operators, and even rivals, were guided by their understanding of his judgment, foresight, and strategic discipline. Reputation, Joey knew, was earned over decades and could be lost in a single misstep. Every operation, negotiation, and intervention carried implications for how others perceived him. His calm decisiveness, ability to manage risk, and strategic patience became the foundation upon which influence rested. Reputation amplified power without requiring constant enforcement. It created a self-regulating network where individuals aligned their actions with expected norms because they respected both the authority and the judgment behind it. Maintaining this reputation required a constant balance between visibility and discretion. Joey projected authority without overt aggression, exerted influence without unnecessary confrontation, and resolved disputes quietly, yet decisively. Even rival factions recognized the weight of his presence. Challenges were rare not because they were impossible, but because they were strategically unwise. Knowledge of his strategic foresight and capacity for measured response created deterrence, reinforcing his control over the network. The organization's internal dynamics reflected the importance of reputation. Ambition, envy, and personal agendas were inherent in any network. Joey mitigated these risks by distributing responsibility strategically, monitoring behavior subtly, and rewarding loyalty consistently. Individuals learned that actions aligned with organizational norms, and Joey's expectations carried tangible and intangible rewards, while deviation resulted in quiet but effective consequences. The interplay between authority and reputation maintained cohesion and minimized disruption. Financial influence was also intertwined with perception. Profits were allocated to reinforce loyalty, support families, and maintain operational security. These actions, while practical, also reinforced Joey's image as a leader who combined pragmatism with care. Associates understood that aligning with his network provided not only protection and opportunity, but also recognition of their value within the organization. Reputation, in this context, became both a psychological and material motivator. External influence was equally critical. Joey's alliances with rival factions, neighborhood operators, and business leaders were reinforced by reputation. His discretion, consistency, and strategic intelligence made partnerships reliable and predictable. Others understood that collaboration with Joey's network carried benefits, but that deviation, betrayal, or misalignment would not go unnoticed. Reputation ensured compliance across a broader spectrum of interactions, extending beyond the immediate organization. Philadelphia's neighborhoods, nightlife, and economic sectors were subtly influenced by Joey's strategic decisions. Businesses served as both revenue sources and intelligence hubs, offering insight into behavior, opportunity, and emerging threats. Through careful observation and discreet intervention, Joey shaped outcomes indirectly, reinforcing his authority without overt control. The city's landscape was both a stage and a tool, manipulated by his presence and strategic foresight. Calculated risk remained a constant factor. Joey understood that decisions could have far-reaching consequences. Expanding influence, acquiring assets, or negotiating alliances involved exposure to both opportunity and danger. Each action was measured against potential outcomes, ensuring that benefits outweighed risks. Patience, observation, and strategic timing amplified the effectiveness of interventions while minimizing vulnerabilities. Reputation, in this context, served as both shield and amplifier, enhancing the impact of decisions without unnecessary visibility. Internal discipline was guided by both authority and perception. Conflicts were addressed quietly, with mentorship, reassignment, or targeted interventions. Public displays of enforcement were rare, reinforcing the perception that Joey's authority was both fair and omnipresent. Those within the organization self-regulated behavior, anticipating the expectations and standards implied by his reputation. Authority was thus reinforced not only by action but by perception, creating a culture of disciplined obedience. Joey's psychological influence extended to rivals as well. Knowledge of his presence, intelligence, and strategic foresight deterred potential threats. Rivals calculated risk carefully, often avoiding confrontation not out of fear alone but out of recognition that Joey's judgment and timing made direct challenges strategically unwise. Reputation became a form of indirect enforcement, shaping behavior across the wider criminal ecosystem. The personal burden of sustaining reputation was considerable. Joey bore responsibility for operational success, internal cohesion, external alliances, and the safety of associates and their families. Decisions had cascading effects, and even minor errors could undermine credibility. Yet his disciplined observation, patience, and strategic foresight maintained resilience, ensuring that reputation translated into enduring influence. By this stage, Joey Merlino's Philadelphia network had evolved into a system where reputation, loyalty, and strategic influence were inseparable. Operations were efficient, alliances stable, and rival factions deterred through perception as much as direct control. Reputation amplified authority, reinforced loyalty, and shaped behavior across multiple layers of the organization and beyond. Joey's mastery lay in understanding that influence was most durable when it combined action with perception, presence with subtlety. Philadelphia's underworld had become a disciplined and resilient ecosystem. Joey's influence was pervasive yet discreet, guiding behavior, reinforcing loyalty, and shaping outcomes without constant enforcement. Authority was reinforced through strategic observation, mentorship, calculated risk, and a reputation that commanded respect. The city's shadows were alive with the presence of a network that operated efficiently, subtly, and enduringly under his guidance. Even amid calm, Joey remained vigilant. Reputation, he knew, was never static. It required maintenance, attention, and strategic action. Missteps, perception shifts, or unanticipated challenges could weaken influence. By managing both action and perception, Joey ensured that Philadelphia's criminal network remained resilient, cohesive, and aligned with his vision. His authority, amplified through reputation, was both subtle and absolute, a defining characteristic of his enduring leadership. By the mid-2020s, Joey Merlino had navigated decades of Philadelphia's underworld, evolving alongside the city and adapting to the changing landscape of organized crime. The modern underworld differed from the past. Technology, surveillance, and societal scrutiny had introduced new challenges. Yet Joey's leadership had matured to meet these complexities. His authority was no longer defined solely by territory or intimidation. It now encompassed strategic influence, operational sophistication, and the subtle orchestration of perception across multiple layers of society. The city had changed, and so had criminal opportunities. Traditional rackets, gambling, loan sharking, and controlled nightlife remained, but new avenues had emerged. Digital operations, cyber-related schemes, and strategic investments in legitimate businesses provided both revenue and cover. Joey had long understood that flexibility was key. Operations were diversified, integrated, and compartmentalized, allowing the organization to thrive even under law enforcement scrutiny. Adaptation was no longer optional. It was essential for survival. Technology became both an ally and a challenge. Digital communications, surveillance cameras, and financial tracking made traditional operations riskier. Joey responded with careful oversight, limiting exposure while employing modern tools for intelligence gathering and coordination. Communication channels were controlled, sensitive information compartmentalized, and key operatives trained to recognize and mitigate digital risks. This balance of adaptation and caution allowed the organization to function efficiently without compromising security. Internal management had grown increasingly complex. Ambition, jealousy, and personal agendas were constant variables. Joey mitigated these by structuring responsibilities strategically, monitoring behavior, and rewarding loyalty consistently. Mentorship became a critical tool. Associates learned not only the mechanics of operations but also the psychology of influence, the importance of discretion, and the subtleties of timing. By developing competent lieutenants, Joey ensured that authority was layered and resilient, reducing reliance on direct intervention while maintaining operational cohesion. The modern underworld also required careful navigation of public perception. Joey maintained a discreet public profile, understanding that reputation was as valuable as direct control. Allies and rivals alike observed behavior closely, interpreting actions, statements, and affiliations for insight into strategy and authority. Joey's calm decisiveness and measured responses reinforced the perception of omnipresence, deterring challenges and reinforcing loyalty. Authority was exercised as much through perception as through action. External alliances had become more critical than ever. Collaboration with other crime figures, business operators, and influential community leaders allowed Joey to expand influence while mitigating risk. Each relationship was assessed for mutual benefit and vulnerability. Strategic cooperation, subtle negotiation, and intelligence gathering ensured that partnerships reinforced the organization's stability. Misalignment was identified early, and interventions were precise, avoiding unnecessary exposure or conflict. Financial management remained central to influence. Revenue streams from both legal and illicit operations were diversified and strategically reinvested. Profit allocation reinforced loyalty, supported families, and funded expansion or operational security measures. The organization's financial structure was carefully monitored, minimizing vulnerabilities while maximizing long-term sustainability. Joey understood that economic control was both a tool of influence and a measure of stability in a constantly evolving underworld. Calculated risk remained at the core of Joey's strategy. Every decision from expansion to alliance formation, from conflict resolution to investment was analyzed for potential outcomes. Timing, context, and subtlety determined execution. Joey allowed patterns to emerge before acting, ensuring that intervention was both effective and discreet. Risks were never reckless. They were measured, deliberate, and employed to strengthen authority rather than provoke unnecessary conflict. Internal cohesion relied on discipline, mentorship, and subtle enforcement. Disputes were addressed quietly, often through guidance or reassignment, rather than public punishment. Operatives internalized organizational norms, aligning behavior with expectations. Compliance was driven by respect for authority, understanding of consequences, and recognition of tangible and intangible rewards. The organization functioned as a self-regulating system, reinforcing loyalty and efficiency across all tiers. Rival factions, though diminished in influence, continued to present challenges. Attempts to disrupt operations, poach allies, or exploit weaknesses were met with observation, intelligence gathering, and precise countermeasures. Joey rarely acted impulsively. He allowed rivals to reveal intentions and vulnerabilities before intervening decisively. By managing confrontation with strategy and subtlety, Joey maintained dominance without unnecessary exposure, reinforcing both respect and fear across Philadelphia's criminal landscape. The psychological dimension of control had become increasingly vital. Joey's calm demeanor, strategic foresight, and subtle interventions influenced both allies and adversaries. People adjusted behavior based on perception of his awareness and judgment. Reputation amplified authority, ensuring that influence extended beyond direct operational oversight. Psychological control became a core component of his leadership, complementing financial, operational, and strategic influence. By the mid-2020s, Joey Merlino's Philadelphia underworld had evolved into a sophisticated ecosystem. Operations were efficient, alliances stable, and loyalty reinforced through observation, mentorship, and strategic reward. Rival factions, law enforcement, and internal ambition were managed with precision, minimizing disruption while maximizing influence. Authority was pervasive yet discreet, exercised through both action and perception, and reinforced by decades of strategic foresight. Even in a modernized criminal environment, Joey remained vigilant. The city's social, economic, and technological dynamics were constantly shifting. Authority required continuous adaptation, observation, and strategic action. Through disciplined oversight, calculated risk, and subtle influence, Joey ensured that Philadelphia's underworld remained resilient, cohesive, and aligned with his vision. His leadership combined tradition with innovation, authority with subtlety, and influence with foresight, a defining blueprint for the modern era of organized crime. Philadelphia's shadows, under Joey Merlino, were no longer merely a network of operations. They were a living system of influence, loyalty, and strategic control. His authority was quiet but absolute. His presence felt in every corner of the city, without overt display. The modern underworld had become an ecosystem that thrived under precision, foresight, and the enduring mastery of one man who understood both people and power better than anyone in his time. By the late 2022s, Joey Merlino had become more than just a figurehead in Philadelphia's underworld. He had become an institution. His decades-long reign had transformed the criminal ecosystem of the city into a disciplined, resilient, and adaptive network. Joey understood that leadership in this world was not measured by short-term victories, but by enduring influence, the loyalty of associates, and the stability of the system he had built. Legacy, he realized, was the culmination of decades of strategy, trust, and calculated action, quietly exercised from the shadows. The organization he had cultivated was no longer dependent solely on his constant oversight. Decades of mentorship, careful delegation, and layered authority had produced a network capable of functioning efficiently in his absence. Lieutenants were not only competent operators but also custodians of his philosophy. That loyalty, discretion, and strategic foresight were the pillars of sustainable power. This delegation did not diminish Joey's authority. It amplified it. Every decision, every operational nuance, reflected his strategic influence. Financial resilience was central to legacy. Joey had diversified revenue streams across both legitimate and illicit enterprises, ensuring the organization could withstand external pressures and internal fluctuations. Legal businesses provided cover and additional influence, while traditional rackets, gambling, nightlife, and controlled enterprises sustained both revenue and network loyalty. Profit distribution was deliberate, reinforcing both operational efficiency and the psychological bonds of loyalty, with families and close associates benefiting from tangible security. The modern underworld had evolved, but Joey adapted seamlessly. Cyber surveillance, digital communication, and law enforcement sophistication had transformed risk management. Joey's response was a combination of operational discipline and technological awareness. Sensitive information was compartmentalized, communication monitored discreetly, and risk meticulously calculated. Even in an era of unprecedented scrutiny, the organization continued to function quietly, efficiently, and with minimal exposure. Influence extended beyond immediate operations. Joey had cultivated relationships with allied factions, business leaders, and community influencers, all of whom recognized his authority and strategic judgment. These alliances were reinforced by mutual benefit, trust, and observation of consistent behavior. By maintaining discretion and exercising subtle interventions, Joey ensured that influence extended across Philadelphia without unnecessary conflict, creating a network of respect, obligation, and controlled compliance. The psychological dimension of leadership remained paramount. Joey's calm demeanor, strategic patience, and omnipresent reputation shaped the behavior of associates and rivals alike. Actions were measured, timing deliberate, and consequences implicit. Those within his network internalized organizational norms, aligning their behavior with expectations without overt enforcement. Respect and fear coexisted subtly, reinforcing both loyalty and authority. Internal management of ambition and potential disruption had matured into a system of mentorship, observation, and calculated reward. High-performing associates were empowered with responsibilities that served both their growth and the organization's stability. Individuals with disruptive tendencies were redirected or carefully monitored. Joey understood that influence was sustained not through intimidation alone, but through the intelligent management of human behavior, ambition, and loyalty. Rival factions continued to exist, but Joey's network had minimized their impact. Strategic observation, intelligence gathering, and discreet intervention ensured that challenges were neutralized before they could escalate. Direct confrontation was rare. Influence, reputation, and subtle negotiation proved more effective. Even when rivals acted, they often underestimated the depth of Joey's insight and the resilience of his organization, resulting in failed efforts and reinforced authority. Philadelphia's social and economic landscape had shifted over the decades, but Joey's network adapted. Businesses were repositioned, operations diversified, and alliances recalibrated. Flexibility allowed the organization to thrive amid gentrification, evolving nightlife, and changing demographics. Joey's foresight ensured that influence was preserved across neighborhoods, while operational security minimized exposure to both rivals and law enforcement. Legacy was also tied to perception. Joey understood that how the organization was viewed by associates, rivals, and the wider public was as important as its operational reality. Quiet authority, demonstrated competence, and strategic foresight created a narrative of inevitability. People acted in alignment with his expectations not only because of authority but because reputation had been carefully cultivated over decades. Even with power consolidated, the personal responsibility remained immense. Joey bore accountability for lives, financial stability, and the long-term sustainability of the network. Every decision carried potential consequences, and errors could reverberate across the organization. Yet his decades of experience, strategic patience, and disciplined oversight ensured resilience, allowing the network to absorb shocks and continue functioning effectively. By this stage, Philadelphia's criminal ecosystem reflected Joey Merlino's vision: disciplined, resilient, and adaptive. Loyalty was reinforced through observation, reward, and mentorship. Rivals were neutralized through strategy and subtle influence. Operations were diversified and compartmentalized, and reputation served as both shield and amplifier of authority. The network functioned as a living system, capable of sustaining itself even as Joey shifted focus from direct oversight to high-level strategic management. Legacy, for Joey, was not merely about wealth or notoriety. It was about enduring influence, operational stability, and the sustained alignment of an organization with his strategic principles. His leadership had created a network that could thrive across decades, adapt to changing circumstances, and maintain cohesion without constant visibility. The organization reflected his philosophy that authority was strongest when exercised quietly, decisively, and strategically. Philadelphia's underworld had become a landscape shaped by foresight, discipline, and subtle power. Joey's influence was pervasive yet discreet, his authority felt in every corner of the city without overt display. In the shadows, a network operated efficiently, guided by the principles Joey had instilled: loyalty, discretion, strategic foresight, and calculated risk. His legacy was not just survival, but mastery, a blueprint for enduring authority in a complex, high-stakes world. Even as time passed, Joey remained vigilant. Legacy required continuous oversight, adaptation, and the careful management of perception and loyalty. Authority was never static, and influence demanded maintenance. Through disciplined strategy, mentorship, and the subtle orchestration of networks, Joey ensured that Philadelphia's underworld remained resilient, cohesive, and aligned with his enduring vision. By the closing years of his reign, Joey Merlino had become a figure whose presence, whether seen or unseen, defined the rhythm of Philadelphia's underworld. Decades of strategy, loyalty, cultivation, and calculated action had culminated in a network that was as disciplined as it was resilient. Joey's life had become an intricate balance of visibility and discretion, influence and patience, control and adaptation. A synthesis that marked him not merely as a boss, but as the last dawn of an era that had evolved alongside the city itself. The title of Last Dawn was not a claim of brute power alone. Joey's leadership had transcended conventional notions of territorial control or public notoriety. Authority in the modern underworld was as much about strategic perception, influence, and intelligence as it was about revenue or enforcement. Joey's decades of observation and adaptation had created a structure capable of sustaining itself. Operations ran efficiently, loyalties were maintained, and influence extended beyond direct oversight. The organization functioned like a finely tuned machine, with each component, whether a street operative, a business ally, or a trusted lieutenant, performing its role in alignment with Joey's strategic vision. One of the defining aspects of Joey's authority was his mastery over human behavior. He understood that ambition, fear, loyalty, and respect were as powerful as money or muscle. Associates and rivals alike learned to calibrate their actions based on subtle cues, decisions, timing, and the implied weight of his presence. Joey's interventions were deliberate and measured. He rarely acted impulsively, understanding that timing often determined both the outcome and perception of authority. Even when action was required, it was executed with precision, minimizing exposure while reinforcing compliance. The modern underworld presented challenges that were foreign to earlier generations. Surveillance technology, digital communication, and the expanded reach of law enforcement required meticulous operational security. Joey adapted by compartmentalizing sensitive information, monitoring digital vulnerabilities, and maintaining strict discretion across all operations. Communication was indirect, intelligence was layered, and oversight was continuous. Even amid a technologically complex landscape, the organization remained both profitable and protected, demonstrating Joey's ability to integrate tradition with modernity. Financial influence remained a cornerstone of authority. Revenue streams from legal and illicit operations were balanced carefully to ensure stability while reinforcing loyalty. Profits were distributed strategically, rewarding competence, protecting families, and maintaining operational security. Financial control was both practical and symbolic. It reinforced the perception that alignment with Joey's network offered security, opportunity, and recognition. This economic foundation strengthened bonds of loyalty and reduced the likelihood of internal disruption. External alliances and rival interactions defined another dimension of Joey's influence. Philadelphia's criminal ecosystem was complex, with remnants of old factions, emerging players, and allied networks intersecting across neighborhoods. Joey's approach was strategic observation, subtle negotiation, and selective intervention. Rivals were rarely confronted openly. Their intentions were assessed carefully, and interventions were precise, neutralizing threats while minimizing attention. This approach enhanced both stability and respect, reinforcing Joey's position without the need for constant displays of force. Internal cohesion was maintained through mentorship, structured responsibility, and subtle enforcement. Ambitious lieutenants were given opportunities to demonstrate competence while learning the principles of discretion, patience, and strategic foresight. Individuals who exhibited tendencies toward disruption were redirected or closely monitored. Joey understood that sustainable authority relied on the intelligent management of human behavior, and that subtle influence often yielded more enduring compliance than overt aggression. The psychological aspect of leadership was central. Joey projected calm, decisiveness, and an omnipresent awareness that extended beyond his physical reach. This projection influenced both allies and rivals, shaping behavior without constant intervention. Reputation had become one of his most powerful tools. It amplified authority, reinforced loyalty, and deterred potential challenges. People aligned their actions with expectation, not solely because of enforcement, but because they recognized the inevitability of Joey's strategic foresight. Philadelphia's evolving social and economic landscape posed continual challenges. Neighborhoods gentrified, nightlife evolved, and economic opportunities shifted. Joey's network adapted accordingly, repositioning businesses, redirecting operations, and recalibrating alliances. Flexibility ensured both operational stability and continued influence, demonstrating that the organization was not tied to circumstance but guided by strategic principles that transcended change. Calculated risk remained an integral aspect of leadership. Every decision from territorial management to alliance negotiation was analyzed for potential outcomes, timing, and broader implications. Joey allowed situations to unfold, observing patterns before acting. Actions were deliberate, reducing error and maximizing influence. Risk was never reckless. It was always strategic, employed to strengthen authority, secure operations, and enhance perception. By the end of his tenure, Joey Merlino had transformed Philadelphia's criminal landscape into a sophisticated network defined by efficiency, loyalty, and influence. Operations were compartmentalized and secure. Financial systems reinforced stability, and alliances extended influence both within and beyond the city. Rivals, internal ambition, and law enforcement pressure were mitigated through strategic observation, precise intervention, and the quiet orchestration of power. Joey's authority was pervasive, subtle, and enduring. The legacy of Joey Merlino, the Last Don, was not merely measured by notoriety or wealth, but by the enduring stability and cohesion of the network he had cultivated. Loyalty, discretion, mentorship, and strategic foresight had created a system capable of surviving and adapting across decades. Influence extended beyond operations, into perception, shaping behavior, reinforcing authority, and sustaining control. The organization had become a living entity, reflective of his philosophy. Power is strongest when exercised quietly, decisively, and strategically. Even in an era of technological scrutiny and social change, Joey's network remained resilient. His authority, amplified through reputation and reinforced through action, was felt across Philadelphia. The city's underworld had evolved, yet it remained disciplined, cohesive, and aligned with his vision. Joey Merlino, through patience, foresight, and calculated strategy, had secured a legacy that would endure beyond his direct involvement, a testament to the art of leadership in the shadows, where influence, loyalty, and discretion converge to create lasting power. The story of Joey Merlino, The Last Dawn, is one of calculated ambition, disciplined oversight, and strategic mastery. Philadelphia's underworld, shaped by his hand, reflects the culmination of decades of observation, adaptation, and subtle authority. In a city defined by change, his legacy endures not in spectacle, but in the quiet, pervasive, and disciplined network that continues to operate under the principles he instilled. Joey's life, leadership, and influence mark the final chapter of a mafia era, a narrative of resilience, foresight, and control that cements his place as the last Don of Philadelphia.